What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel and welcome to my updated college football playoff predictions. No, this is not a if the season were to end today, this is the way that I have the college football playoff shaking out. This is a as we project forward, as we take a look at what else is going to happen throughout the year, the way I see the college football playoff bracket shaping out. I wanted to upload this today after the fact that, after the college football playoff rankings came out, because after all the chaos that happened this past week, I wanted to see how the committee was evaluating certain teams. And now that I know how the committee is evaluating certain teams, we can go ahead and dive on in to talking about how I think the college football playoff bracket is going to shape out. Hey, please, if this is your first time on the channel, help support it in any way you can. If you'd like, it would mean a lot to me, whatever you may be willing and or able to do. But the biggest thing being, thank you so much for just simply sitting down, taking time out of your day, and watching this video. You want to support the channel in other ways. Biggest way, obviously, hitting that subscribe button and ringing the bell. And if you're a returning viewer and haven't done so already, you better. No. I'm just kidding. But hey, if you are as big of a college football nerd as I am, I would really appreciate if you hit that subscribe button. Join on this final home stretch of the college football playoff journey with me. We're going to be talking a lot of ball over the last couple of weeks here. But again, you can also like, you can comment, you can share. And if you want to support me outside of YouTube, go give me a follow on Twitter or X. It's at TailgateNate29. And I would be really appreciative if you would go support me over there, as pretty darn soon here, I'm going to start posting a lot more about what I do within the sports media industry to give you guys a better idea of what I do. And hey, I just think it's cool to share what I do because I love what I do. So I would really appreciate it if you would support me in any way you can. But without further ado, we're just going to get right on into the playoff bracket. Beforehand, I will say again, this is not a if this season were to end today. This is the college football playoff bracket because we literally just got that from the college football playoff committee last night, and that makes no sense to do to me. What instead I do in these videos is I project forward. I look at, okay, who do I think is going to wind out as conference champs? Who do I think wins this tiebreaker, that tiebreaker, and where I think, based on what we've seen from the committee, where these teams would fall and what games we are going to have in the college football playoff. And obviously, we'll predict the bracket as it goes forward. But the number one seed in the country, I'll tell you about after we get a quick water break. Especially if you're in colder climates, the air is getting really dry out there, and my throat is definitely feeling that today. So make sure you drink water. That's my PSA for the day. With the committee ranking 4 of the top 5 teams in the country as Big Ten teams, there is little to no question to me that the Big Ten champ is going to be getting that number 1 overall seed. And to me, the way things currently stand right now, I see Ohio State and Oregon, the top 2 teams in the country, according to the committee, being in the Big Ten championship game, which obviously the way I'm projecting things forward means I think Ohio State's going to beat Indiana. And who do I see winning that rematch? Well, it is the Ohio State Buckeyes, and I think they will get that number 1 overall seed as the Big Ten champ. In the number 2 hole, this is where I think the SEC champ is going to belong. Now, unless it's anything like the LSU Tigers or something crazy like that, where you could see the SEC champ not get a first-round bye, I think more likely than not, the SEC champ is going to end up getting that number 2 seed because, again, unless anything crazy happens, it's going to be a team with 2 losses that, for the most part, has some pretty solid wins on their resume. And the way that I'm projecting things forward as of right now, I think Texas A&M is an SEC play-in game, a game at the end of the season to determine who goes to Atlanta in the SEC championship game. Loser is out. And the way that all the SEC tiebreakers have sorting out, if a bunch of teams were to wind up with 2 conference losses, you get all the way down to win percentage within conference games. So basically, actually, I explained that really bad. Basically, what will happen is the teams that are tied, because there will not be enough common opponents to commit a head-to-head record. There won't be enough this, that, or really just any of the other tiebreakers the SEC were to use. It'll come down to which team, I guess for lack of better terminology, has the highest strength of schedule, which means they will take all the teams you played in SEC conference play, they will tally up their win totals, and whichever team has the highest winning percentage among their opponents they played in conference play will make the SEC title game. That, after crunching the numbers and doing the math as of right now, is the Alabama Crimson Tide. I have them playing Texas in the SEC title game, and I have them winning, especially if they play like they did against LSU this past week. my oh my, the Tide are going to be a really tough team to stop. And even though they are a two-loss team, I think winning the SEC would get them enough prejudice over the teams that I end up having here at 3 and 4 to wind up going with that number 2 seed. But no matter what way you slice, I do think Alabama is your SEC champ the way that I see it as of right now. Number 3 and number 4 are interesting. Number 3 I have is the ACC champ. Is it SMU? Is it Miami? I still think it's the Miami Hurricanes, and let me explain why. If Miami and Clemson both were to end conference play 7-1, obviously none of this matters if Clemson does not beat Pitt. I, for one, think they do, but hopefully we'll have a preview prediction video up on the channel so you can find out a little bit more as to why I think that. But if both teams wind up 7-1, I think Miami wins those tiebreakers. Obviously, if SMU wins out, they're 8-0. They're going to get into the ACC championship game. But you could just feel like a loss was coming on for the Miami Hurricanes because they've been playing with fire all season long. Virginia Tech, California, Louisville, Duke, and then that one against Georgia Tech is where they finally cracked, right? I just don't see Miami cracking the rest of the way. I know they got some tough ones coming up, especially that one on the road against Syracuse to wind out the season, but Miami, I still have being the best team in the ACC. The one loss is probably going to prevent them from getting that 2 seed, but I do believe that Miami still wins the ACC, and I still believe BYU wins the Big 12. Obviously, BYU, the front runner in the Big 12 right now, they're the only undefeated team left in the conference and one of the only undefeated teams left throughout the entire country, but you sort of get the sense with BYU, the same sentiment that I just had with the Miami Hurricanes, right? It sort of feels like they're playing with fire, right? And BYU, I think, is very, very close to coming away with a loss. And they got a lot of really tough games. If that defensive holding doesn't get called, well, we're talking about a much more competitive and interesting Big 12 race. Not that there isn't one already, but BYU can still afford a conference loss, and they're going to get into the Big 12 championship game. There are a bunch of other teams still vying for that spot, including the only other team with one loss in the conference in Colorado, Arizona State, West Virginia, Kansas State, and a whole bunch of other teams in there as well. Iowa State, I think, still even in the mix at that point as well. But BYU's got Kansas this week. They got Arizona State next week. And you can just kind of feel the same feeling you had with Miami, that a loss may be imminent for this team, which is what I am predicting. And it's why they're at 4. But I still do have them winning the Big 12 and in the playoff bracket. Group of 5 race, I want to talk about a little bit. Still no question to me that it is Boise State, but where they are seating is starting to become maybe not more of a question, but more of a definite that they will wind up as this 12 seed, because even with all the chaos that happened this past week, Ole Miss beating Georgia, Miami going down, Alabama absolutely stomping the crap out of LSU in Death Valley, BYU being on the ropes, and a couple of other things happening there as well, Boise State didn't gain any ground. They lost some. They dropped one spot in the playoff rankings, which just tells me no matter what chaos happens, I do believe that Boise State's going to wind up as that 12th seed. 5 seed is easy. It's going to be the loser of the Big Ten championship game, whether that's Indiana, Ohio State, or Oregon. They're going to get the 5. In this scenario, again, Ohio State, Oregon play in Indy, with Ohio State coming out on top, which means Oregon is going to be relegated to that 5 seed, but they're still going to be one of the favorites to win the national championship game, and they get a rematch with Boise State in that first round matchup. When you take a look at the 6 seed, well, with Texas being a one-loss team entering the SEC title game, and me having Texas lose to the Alabama Crimson Tide, Texas, for me, would go ahead and get that 6 seed again. That's just the way I am projecting things outward and forward. So Texas gets that 6 seed. 7, pretty easy here for me as well. I think it's the Penn State Nittany Lions. The ACC runner-up in SMU, I don't think is good enough to pass them. The Big 12 runner-up, definitely not going to be good enough to pass any of these teams. So now you start getting into sort of these at-large bids, teams that didn't play in the conference championship game, because I don't think the team that doesn't win the Big 12 or doesn't win the ACC but is in that conference championship game, even if it is the SMU Mustangs, I still don't think that they are going to be a team that will make the college football playoff bracket, which I guess spoils the bracket the rest of the way. But Penn State, I have at 7. Only loss would be to the Big Ten champ in the Ohio State Buckeyes. Same thing with the Indiana Hoosiers. Penn State's strength of schedule just simply is going to be better than that of the Indiana Hoosiers. Indiana, again, may very well lose to Ohio State by more than what Penn State lost to them by, which was a touchdown. And obviously Indiana loses on the road. Penn State loses at home. That debate could get pretty interesting, but to me, I feel like Penn State's going to have the better, best win. Penn State's best win up to this point is Illinois, and Indiana's best win is Nebraska, Michigan, both teams that might struggle to make bowl games this season. Indiana's still a really phenomenal team. I just think the resume would drop them below Penn State there, and it's the way the playoff committee has it shaped out right now. Penn State's at 4, Indiana's at 5. You just drop them a little bit, and they're in the playoff bracket. Now, when you dive on into the 9, 10, and 11 seeds here, this is where things start to get really, really interesting, because now is the time where you have to start to consider some of these 2-loss teams in the SEC that did not make their conference championship game. I'm looking at Tennessee, I'm looking at Ole Miss, and I'm looking at Georgia. But the team that you also have to throw into this debate as well is the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and it's a team that I have at 9. Projecting outward, I don't think Notre Dame loses another game this season. And even with that loss to NIU, which by far and away, unless something chaotic and crazy happens, is going to be the worst loss out of any team in the playoff field. Since that loss, they've been dominant. They're going to have a win against Georgia Tech, who, again, just beat the Miami Hurricanes, and they're going to get into a pretty good bowl game. They're going to have a win over Louisville, and Louisville has been ranked by the College Football Playoff Committee. They're going to have a win over Army. They're going to have a win on the road against USC, a win on the road against Texas A&M, a team that's probably going to wind up ranked in the final rankings. Notre Dame's got a solid resume. I hate that people are sitting here pretending like Notre Dame doesn't have any quality wins on their resume. Guys, if Texas A&M gets into the SC title game, that's going to help out Notre Dame a ton. And even if Texas A&M does not get in there, they're still likely going to wind up as only a 3-loss team. Notre Dame beat them on the road by double digits. They're going to have some other really, really good wins. Louisville's going to be a good win on their resume as well. I think Notre Dame is deserving of a college football playoff spot. And the way that things are shaking out right now as well, they are ranked ahead of even the Miami Hurricanes right now, but are also ranked ahead of a lot of these other 2-loss conference teams, right? Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, but Notre Dame is ranked ahead of all of them. I think the committee stays consistent with that, and they put Notre Dame at 9. Now, with 10 and 11, this is where things get interesting because, again, the 3 teams I mentioned earlier, Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Georgia. Those are the 3 teams I am looking at to get these final 2 spots. And no matter what happens, someone is going to be left out, and someone is going to be left hurt. Ole Miss, out of the 2, may very well have the worst loss. And the loss against the Kentucky Wildcats, and I believe they even lost that game at home. That probably is going to be the worst loss because Georgia moving forward, maybe they lose to Georgia moving forward. If every team winds up with 2 losses, they're going to have a win over the Tennessee Volunteers. Their losses are obviously going to be to Alabama, and the other loss is going to be to Ole Miss there as well. When you take a look at Ole Miss, again, their other loss in the season, who was it? Oh, yes, that's right. It was to LSU in overtime in Death Valley would be Ole Miss's other loss. So based on what the committee ranked teams as last week, though, head-to-head is still seeming to matter a lot. Now, when you break down the resume as a whole, Ole Miss probably has the worst resume out of the 3 because Tennessee's going to have a win over the team that I eventually have winning the SEC in the Alabama Crimson Tide. Georgia's going to have a win over Tennessee. They're going to have a win over some other really good and premier programs, but the committee valued head-to-head, which is why I think Ole Miss gets the 10 head-to-head win over Georgia, and Georgia gets the 11 head-to-head win over Tennessee. I can see the fire in the comment section now. It is really, really hard to project forward what the College Football Playoff Committee is going to do, because even if Tennessee loses that game to Georgia this upcoming week, which is, again, what I am projecting, and maybe a little spoiler for my preview prediction video to come out later today, but this is going to be an absolutely phenomenal race to the finish, especially in the SEC, and there's going to be at least 1, maybe 2 teams that get left out of this thing and that are going to go home very, very unhappy. That's the way that I see it playing out. I think head-to-head is going to matter to the committee more than anything, and even though Ole Miss has the worst resume, and by that, I mean the 2 worst losses, even though losing on the road in Death Valley, not a bad loss. In my opinion, the Kentucky loss, okay, yeah, that very well might be. I still see, again, that head-to-head tiebreaker being the difference maker here. Okay, we'll go through the rest of the bracket really quickly. I think Notre Dame will beat the Indiana Hoosiers. Really good story for the Hoosiers this year, but Notre Dame is playing too good of football right now. I got them beating Indiana. Obviously, I think Oregon is going to win that game against Boise State. This is not the same Oregon team that Boise State saw in week 2. Oregon's going to not necessarily roll. They'll still have some trouble containing Genty, but they will win that game. Penn State and Ole Miss. This is where things get interesting, though, but I do think Penn State will come out on top. I think their pressure and ability to get back to Jackson Dart. You saw Georgia, even though they lost, they were able to get pressure back to Jackson Dart, and it flustered him. I do think Penn State will win that game. And then Texas and Georgia, I got Texas winning that rematch. I just don't think Georgia's been a consistent enough football team. I think Carson Beck will make some mistakes, and Texas will wind out of that one the winner. Okay, final 4 teams now. Well, I think you're going to get your third meeting of Ohio State and Oregon, because I got the Buckeyes beating the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and I have Oregon beating the BYU Cougars. You take a look at the other side of the bracket, and I got a rematch of the SEC championship game, folks. I think Alabama, especially if they play like they did against LSU, they're going to be dynamite. They're going to be really hard to stop. And then I do have Texas beating Miami there as well. That might be the semifinal of the college football playoffs, though, if it were to play out this way. National championship game, I do have Ohio State beating Oregon. They'll go 2-1 against the Ducks this season. And then Alabama, Texas, again, a rematch of the SEC title game. I think Alabama's going to come out on top again. I think Jalen Milroe is too good. He's too versatile, and he's going to help the Crimson Tide win that one. Rematch of the 2020 National Championship game, and the Buckeyes get their revenge. I'll stick with my preseason pick. Ohio State wins the National Championship. I know I ran through that bracket there really quickly, but please let me know anything that you might change or anything that you may have thought I got wrong, because, hey, the college football playoff is up for great debate right now. But remember to play hard but tailgate harder. I'll see all you guys in the next video. Goodbye.